Well, I guess we better get a whole chapter covered now that Chris has shared the news there. I better get through this chapter. It is a long chapter, though, so 51 verses, and it's just a whole lot of detail. Chapter 7 of 1 Kings. I think we read the first verse and very briefly discussed a little bit of what was in that first verse of chapter 7. But we'll pick up there in 1 Kings chapter 7 and verse 1 to get started with our class this evening. And hopefully we can work all the way through chapter 7, make it through these 51 verses. Uh-oh. All right. If someone will, just read verse 1 for us.
But Solomon took 13 years to build his own house, so he finished all his house.
You know, some of the things that you'll come across and read, and I guess I should have had you read a little further. That cut off in a weird spot, didn't it? Some of the things that you can read as it pertains to the time frame and how long it actually took him to build his house. They'll look back at how long it took to build the temple, right? And the temple was 7 years. Well, they'll look at his house and they'll say, well, man, it took 13 years. It seems like there might have been some sort of problem there. But can we necessarily say that there was a problem in it taking him 13 years to build his palace? 7 years to build the temple? What are some reasons that we might be able to think of as to why it only took 7 years to build the temple? And I say only, that's a pretty good span of time, right? What's the thoughts? Yes, sir.
The temple wasn't as large as a house that he would fit, I imagine, how many concubines and wives did he have? I mean, that
A lot.
would have been a pretty big house with a lot of separation rooms.
And he builds a whole lot of different structures, as we'll see when we get working into the text. Let me get started on this. But one of the things, you know, and me and Brandy talked about this last Wednesday after the class, one of the things that she mentioned was there was probably urgency about getting the temple built, right? And I would assume there was. I mean, this was something that Solomon was supposed to do when he came in to be king. This is in the 4th year of his reign when he started to build it. It took some 7 years to finish it, so there was some urgency. But like Aaron's saying, we're talking about a 90-foot by 30-foot wide big box, 45 feet tall. So it's not just all that impressive in size. What's really impressive about it was all the fine detail on the inside. Now, don't get me wrong, everything about this temple was the best of material that could be brought and used for this temple. This is going to represent the dwelling place of God among his people, all lined with gold and everything that we saw. So yes, it took a decent amount of time, but it's not nearly the size of a palace. Yes, sir.
He had scores of skilled workers working on the temple also.
That's right. It's quite hard to even imagine the thousands and thousands that we saw in the text that were actually working on this temple. You know, how he was having them going 10,000 per shift going over and working with Hiram's people. So many people working on this, and it still took 7 years. And we're talking about a 90-foot long by 30-foot wide box, essentially. I know it's much more than that, but in the grand scheme, it's pretty much what it was. Yes, sir.
And technically all the supplies came down from sea level. And Jerusalem was set on a hill.
Right.
And I mean, it took a lot of work.
Oh, yeah.
Just to get the stuff up there.
Right.
Than to finish it out. But I think a lot of those years were spent in that fine detail.
There at the latter part of it, with all the gold overlay and the carving in the wood.
You can have all those people bring it all, but then it's only so many people that are going to be able to overlay that gold.
Right.
That artisan, the fine skilled workers that are going to be allowed to even mess with that.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yes, sir.
I was going to say, he was in reign for 40 years, is that correct?
Solomon, yes.
And it took a combination of 7 and 13, that was 20 years. So it spent half his reign comprising
that's right.
what you would have as the temple and the palace together, his
Right.
house.
And even the first 4 years, it's 4 years as we move through the text, and then he starts the temple, and then it's 7. So you add to that 20, it's 24 years roughly. In the time frame that all that takes place. That's a good observation. Yes, sir. Right. So that's a good observation. Yes, sir.
I was going to say also, each building had a different purpose.
Mm-hmm.
And the temple, he was trying to get it ready so that the people could worship God the way they were supposed to be doing. But the house, he had to have a lot more rooms and like the difference between building a big open shed to store hay in and
Right.
then building a house to live in.
That's right. Absolutely. There's a lot more detail that would have went into, you know, and I mean, there was a lot of detail that went into this temple, but the vast size we're fixing to see of these structures that Solomon builds that make up his palace, if you will, these are some really large structures in comparison to just his temple. Yes, sir.
Well, Aaron nailed it. When you're dealing with all these picky women that get started and change their minds, and you gotta start over again.
That was,
Start over again, and they're bickering and fighting amongst themselves.
that was David Bankston that said that. That was not me.
Oh, you can go there. I ain't got a wife, so
There you go. There you go.
I'd like to have one in the future, you know.
I'm gonna move forwards before anybody starts throwing things. If someone will, go ahead and read verses 2 through 5, please.
He also built the house of the forest of Lebanon. Its length was 100 cubits, its width 50 cubits, and its height 30 cubits, with 4 rows of cedar pillars and cedar beams on the pillars. And it was paneled with cedar above the beams that were on 45 pillars, 15 to a row. There were windows with beveled frames in 3 rows, and windows,
I know.
and window was opposite window. Okay, that makes sense now. In 3 tiers, and all the doorways and doorposts had rectangular frames, and window was opposite window in 3 tiers.
Thank you, Johnny. Hey, just for the record, when I read through that the first time too, I was like, wait, what? What did I just read? And I tell you what, I've had a lot of time in building and in construction, and I feel like I'm fairly decent at looking at a plan and being able to tell you what's going on in a blueprint, things of that nature. This little section right here, I don't know that I can fully explain what this structure looks like. It's quite a challenge when you really start trying to look at this and the details, and you start trying to, you know, provide an image in your own mind as to what this structure actually looks like, other than the details, like it talking about its length was 100 cubits, so it's 150 feet long. Its width was 50 cubits, so it's 75 feet wide. Its height was 30 cubits, so it's 45 feet tall. This one structure is by far much larger than what the temple was. That part's not hard to figure out. It was paneled with cedar above the beams that were on 45 pillars, 15 to a row. So I can pretty well see 15, 15, 15. That's all making sense right now, right? Well, then you keep moving forward, and it says there was windows with beveled frames in 3 rows, and window was opposite window in 3 tiers. That starts getting a little bit challenging. I've seen some strange drawings that people have come up with and trying to show exactly what this looked like. Some had like all these columns that were standing, and then had like walls on top of those, and then you had 3 windows, and they were in every gap where you had a piling, and then you had 3 windows, and it was just like that all the way around, the same on the other side of the structure. So it was window across from window, essentially. Maybe that's what it is. I'm not 100% sure. But then it talks about the, let's see, it has in verse 5, and all the doorways and the doorposts had rectangular frames, and window was opposite window in the 3 tiers. Now, I'm not 100% certain. It's a little bit challenging when I start trying to lay out how these poles lay out and all of the structure, but this was a large structure. And the reason that it's actually called the name that it was given, to the best of anybody's understanding, the forest of Lebanon, the house of the forest of Lebanon, it looked like a forest. I mean, there were pole after pole after pole after pole all on the inside of this structure, and it basically made it look somewhat like what the forest would look if you were standing in the forest. Now, that one's not big enough. Well, this is somebody's drawing, and it didn't have a copyright, so I got with Preston, and he showed me how to put the website at the bottom just in case, but it was an image that kind of gives a layout, and this would be the house of the forest of Lebanon. The pillar hall there, the throne room, and then the palace and the house of Pharaoh's daughter, and of course the temple and courtyard is just up to the north of that. It's one possibility as far as how all these structures would have laid out as far as his palace grounds. That's one possibility. Another was drawn in this sense, and it's, I guess one guess is as good as another. They're trying to base it off some of their, past discoveries and archaeological digs and things of that nature, but they're all just a little bit different. This would have been that house of the forest of Lebanon, and, maybe that is pretty much all it was with these walls up on top. I'm not 100% sure, but that's the first structure that's mentioned in the text. Now, the other ones are a little bit easier for me to visualize. That one, a little bit harder. If somebody will, read verse 6 through 8 for us.
He also made the hall of pillars. Its length was 50 cubits, and its width 30 cubits. And in front of them was a portico with pillars, and a canopy was in front of them. Then he made a hall for the throne, the hall of judgment, where he might judge, and it was paneled with cedar from floor to ceiling. And the house where he dwelt had another court inside the hall of like workmanship. Solomon also made a house like this hall for Pharaoh's daughter, whom he had taken as wife.
Thanks, sir. So the next one in the list is a hall of pillars, and if it is the case, this one right here in the middle, possibly. The other layout had it above it. I'm not 100% certain. They're all kind of guessing. But these are much less detail in describing them, and it's a little bit easier to understand kind of what is being said in the text. Verse 6, the hall of pillars, its length was 50 cubits, so it's 75 feet long, and its width was 30 cubits, 45 feet wide. And in front was a portico, like a porch area with pillars, and a canopy was in front of them. So this structure itself is the dimensions given with a porch right off of the front. Pretty easy to understand. The previous, when you have these 4 rows of cedar pillars and cedar beams on pillars and then another 45 posts, it's hard to determine. This is pretty straightforward, a lot easier for me to understand. The next one, verse 7, he made the hall of the throne the hall of judgment. And it's pretty straightforward as what's going to take place within this structure. This is where he might judge the people and, work his justice for the people, one of his responsibilities, right? So it's pretty straightforward what he was going to do there. And one of the other things I forgot to mention, the first structure that was mentioned, the forest of Lebanon, we'll see later in 1 Kings chapter 10 that was actually later used for an armory. They would store a lot of their shields and things of that nature, so it's an awful lot of space, and they put it to some good use in the sense of storing some of their things. But verse 8, and the house where he dwelt had another court inside the hall of like workmanship. Solomon also made a house like this hall for Pharaoh's daughter. So a specific place for her and her living area. Not really any mention in this part of the text as far as all the others that we were talking about earlier on, more just a mention for her. This is a location where she would be, but to my understanding, possibly a different area. Now, I'd have to study that out just a little bit more as far as where the rest of them would be. There's always this little bit of difference, stated in the text when it's talking about her in comparison to the rest. Even later on, when it talks about all these wives that he took for himself, it mentions all of them, and then it lists her again by herself. Not real sure what the purpose of that is, but that's just how the text reads. Okay, so that's kind of the layout. This was his 13 years in the building, all of this section right down here at the bottom. Solomon's house was something massive with a courtyard. You have the pillar, the hall of pillars, the house of the forest of Lebanon, the hall of thrones, all of these things, plus the house of Pharaoh's daughter. This up here, the temple, taking 7 years. Now, what we will see as we continue to work through the text, once we get to about verse 13, is we got to still cover all these little parts that are on the outside area for the work that goes on around the temple. That'll be seen in the upcoming verses. after a little bit more discussion about the palace itself. If somebody will read verse 9 through 12 for us, please.
All these were costly stones cut to size, trimmed with saws inside and out, from the foundation to the eaves, and also from the outside to the great court. The foundation was of costly stones, large stones, some 10 cubits and some 8 cubits, and above were costly stones hewn to size in cedar wood. The great court was enclosed with 3 rows of hewn stones and a row of cedar beams. So were the inner court of the house of the Lord and the vestibule of the temple.
Thank you, sir.
Sir.
So, just a little recognition there in verse 9, you know, the costly stones, everything that was going into the build as it pertained to the temple as well to the build of his own palace, everything was the best of the best material that could be provided. And all of this, again, is being hand-hewn. This is being hand-cut by men. Nothing like the quarries which we could go and see today, the rock plants where they're, you know, cutting out all this stone. This is done by hand. Again, that might also add to some of the length of time and how long it took to build these structures. This is not an easy process. And then you look at the size of some of these stones, as it was mentioned there in verse 10. Large stones, some 10 cubits and some 8 cubits, that's 15 feet across these stones. Those are massive. Cutting them alone was one thing. Getting them things moved, that's a whole nother deal. Yes, sir.
I think this is marble or granite or I mean, what's the costly stones? I mean, I would think that would be just as we value marble and granite today, that it would have been valued back then as well.
Possibly. The only thing, you know, I haven't researched that too much. Now, just a thought off, you know, from my own thought on this, granite would have been quite the challenge to cut and actually hewn for the tools they had available. You know, everything that they do with granite's diamond to help cut that stuff, whereas with stone they can use other tools. And you even think back in you know, history and looking at some of the structures that still remain, even moving into you know, the Roman Empire or the Greece or any of these areas, it's more of like a limestone or something of that nature, if I'm not mistaken, quartz or something of that nature. I'm not 100% certain, but I don't know if it'd be granite. But it is, you know, again, the best of what they had. But typically, what you know, I always have in mind is some white stone, a lot like a limestone or something of that nature, and it has to be something that's fairly easy for them to hewn, you know, with the tools that they had available. But that's just my guess. My guess. I haven't actually, you know, researched to see exactly what type of stone it was. It was just costly. It was expensive. Yes, sir. I'm sorry, Aaron. I'll try and study that out this week.
Also, you know, a large part of the cost is the labor it took to make them the way that they were made. They were perfectly straight.
Right. Everything about it was just, you know, to the best it could possibly be done then, all the way to the workers, even that, you know, David was talking about earlier. And we're fixing to see one come in on verse 13 and following about this certain individual who had a special talent. You know, just as those of Tyre had a special talent of cutting timber, there's this guy that has a special talent of working with bronze, and he's going to be the man that was hired to do, you know, all of the stuff that's on the outside of the temple for the molten sea and all of these other things, the carts and all of this. So much detail going into all of it. Yes, sir.
I mean, we don't know what to do, but one thing, our tendency is to underestimate their capabilities rather than overestimate them back then.
That's true.
You know,
Some of the, you know, some of the great wonders of the world were created even before this. At least one.
so
You know.
I wouldn't put anything past what they
Yeah.
might have done. You know,
That's right.
So we don't know.
That's very true. You know, we shouldn't belittle it by any means as far as their capabilities, because they had done great things. Even you think back to the pyramids and, you know, the capability of building things of that nature, even in that time frame with, you know, the tools and the manpower that they had, is just absolutely fascinating to even imagine. Large stones, very large, anywhere from 15 to 12, 14 feet in size, some of the bigger ones. All hewn, all cut cedar wood again, used in these things. The courtyard lined with the 3 rolls of stone, as well as a row of cedar beams, very similar to what we saw in the courtyard as far as it pertained to the temple area. This courtyard, I'm assuming, is somewhat what's being discussed here, as well as we saw the inner court that was mentioned in the text there in verse 12 also. But just a lot of detail on the material and how they actually were able to build these things. But if there's no other questions or thoughts in that section, we'll go ahead. I don't know that I'm going to make it through the chapter. If someone will read verses 13 and 14 for us, please.
Now King Solomon sent and brought Hiram from Tyre. He was the son of a widow from the tribe of Naphtali, and his father was a man of Tyre, a bronze worker. He was filled with wisdom and understanding, and skill in working with all kinds of bronze work. So he came to King Solomon and did all his work.
So one man named specifically here, this was the guy. This is who Solomon wanted. This is who's going to do all the bronze work. And what we're going to see is some of this bronze work is, large, extremely large pieces of work. Again, even in what Chris was just saying and how that they could do this with the things that they had of that time, pretty impressive, pretty amazing. But this is the man that's chosen. He is from up in the Tyre area, same location as where you see all the woodworkers and things of that nature, and he has this understanding and skill set to work with the bronze. So this is the man that's chosen. So let's go ahead and start reading there. Somebody read verse 15 through 17, please.
And he cast 2 pillars of bronze, each one 18 cubits high, and a line of 12 cubits measured the circumference of each. Then he made 2 capitals of cast bronze to set on the tops of the pillars. The height of one capital was 5 cubits, and the height of the other capital was 5 cubits.
One more verse, please, sir.
He made a lattice network with reeds of chain work for the capitals which were on top of the pillars, even chains for one capital and 7 for the other capital.
Thank you, sir. Did y'all get all that part and all this detail and what this actually looks like? Some of these are pretty challenging. These capitals, or the pillars, I should say, they're 18 cubits high. Remember, the temple was the temple was 30 cubits high, so these are 18 cubits. They're 2/3 of the height of the temple itself, and these are 12 cubits measured in the circumference of each. These are very large cylinders, right, and they're bronze. Well, this one man is working on these things, and I'm sure he has people that are helping him. He's the one who had the specific talent and the ability to do so, but I'm sure if I was to guess, he had some other helpers with him. But he makes these 2 big pillars and then these capitals cast of bronze, almost like a decorative piece to set right at the very top of this pillar, which is just a round, tall cylinder, and then you have this bowl shape piece that sets on the top of it. So you have 18 cubits in the one piece, and then you have 7 cubits also in the capital that sat on the top of it. And then some of the detail that goes into that, the lattice network with wreaths, with chain work for the capitals, which were on top of the pillars, 7 chains for one capital. We can only imagine, really, as far as exactly what this looked like. But what it was very nice. It was very decorative to show that it was something that was much time that was involved with this. But not a whole lot, that really can be said about these other than they are massive pieces of work that, they're preparing to set right out in front of the temple. If someone will, go ahead and read the verse 18 through 20 for us.
So he made the pillars and 2 rows of pomegranates above the network, all around to cover the capitals that were on top, and thus he did for the other capital. The capitals which were on top of the pillars in the hall were in the shape of lilies, 4 cubits. The capitals on the 2 pillars also had pomegranates above by the convex surface which was next to the network, and there were 200 such pomegranates in rows on each of the capitals all around.
Thanks, sir. You know, some of the detail that goes into that, especially right there at the end of verse 20, 200 such pomegranates in rows on each of the capitals all around. Some of the fine detail that went into this work, very impressive. Really a masterpiece, if you will, of this capital that was to set on these pillars that are right outside of the temple. Very nice, very well built, it seems, and no, you know, expense spared, if you will. The shape of them, to the best of my understanding and what I've seen, you know, they're sitting on top of these great big cylinders. They come out and somewhat do something of that nature. I'm assuming that's the idea of this lily shape. It comes up and it rolls out toward the top. But these are very large and impressive. Would have took a great deal of time to make these, but this is the first of his things that he's going to build. We're going to keep moving forwards. Someone, if you will, read verse 21 through 22.
And he set up the pillars by the vestibule of the temple. He set up the pillar on the right and called its name Joachim. And he set up the pillar on the left and called its name Boaz.
Good job on the pronunciations. Very good. Really, the two names there is kind of what's significant in this. You might have a footnote there that is one of them being he shall establish, and the other being the idea of strength. So he shall establish and strength are the names of these two pillars that are out at the front of the temple. Very fitting for what this house is. Not so much, I think, as far as for the physical structure itself, but maybe more in the sense of pointing toward God and Him being their strength and Him being the one who has established this people. My thought on that. Now, I guess it could be leaning toward the physical, but I would assume it had more of a spiritual connection, you know, for it over the physical. So the two pillars set up. You know, there's not a whole lot that we really have to say about that. But these great pieces of work are setting right out at the front of the temple. Now, let's go into some of these other details, the outer and inner parts, or the outer and inner temple furnishings. This is just more stuff that was made of bronze for the use and for the work of the priest and everything that they were doing there at the temple. If someone will read verse 23 through 26 for us, please.
And he made the sea of cast bronze 10 cubits from one brim to the other. It was completely round. Its height was 5 cubits, and a line of 30 cubits measured its circumference. Below its brim were ornamental buds encircling it all around, 10 to a cubit, all the way around the sea. The ornamental buds, 3 looking forward toward the north, 3 looking toward the west, and 3 looking toward the south, and 3 looking toward the east. The sea was set upon them, and all their back parts pointed inward. It was a handbreadth thick, and in its brim was shaped like the brim of a cup, like the lily blossom. It contained 2,000
Baths.
baths.
There you go. Thank you, sir.
I'm losing my side. I didn't bring
Oh, it's all right.
and
Hey, I know how it is. I know how it is, man.
I'm fighting it every day.
Last time I went to the eye doctor, he asked me, he said, "Are you losing your close vision yet?" And I said, "Oh, well, no, absolutely not." I tell you, a month later, it's like stuff started getting fuzzy up close. He jinxed me, man. I feel your pain. Okay, so this sea and the oxen, this sea cast of bronze, this is a massive bowl, if you will. It is very large. It holds a tremendous amount of water. I have a footnote here in my Bible showing 12,000 gallons as a possibility of what this can actually hold. This is, it says there in the text, it is, 10 cubits. It's 15 foot across from one side to the other at the lip. And it was completely round. Its height was 5 cubits. So it's 15 feet across. It is 7.5 feet deep. That's pretty large. Now, the underside of this has these 12 oxen, and basically you have this great big bowl, if you will, and then you have 3 oxen, 3 oxen, 3 oxen, and 3 facing that way. And this big bowl sets directly on the backs of these oxen, and all of this was cast from bronze. Now, if you look back into Exodus chapter 30, about verses 18 through 21, if you want to write that down for your own notes, there's also this, container that was built, and it had a purpose even with the priests then and them going in, and this is where they would wash their hands, they would wash and things of that nature as they prepared to go about and do the work that they had to do with the temple, as far as the sacrifices and things of that nature. This one is massive. And again, no cost was spared in how much effort, goes into all of the detail, even in this thing, and what the, all the detail in the engravings and things of that nature that are cast into the side of this great big container. But holds somewhere around 12,000 gallons of water, hands width thick, 4 to 6 inches. That's the thickness of this great big bowl. I don't know how big a typical swimming pool, like a round swimming pool is, but I think an average is probably 30 feet across, and about, the above grounds are maybe 30 feet across, and what are they, 4 feet deep? Is that about right? This thing's 15 foot across and 7.5 foot deep. I mean, this is pretty large, sitting on the backs of these oxen that have been made also, and all of it stationed out there in front of the temple. Thoughts, questions?
I always felt when I read this, how bloody and how messy it would get up there. They would need all this water, not only for the priests to clean themselves, but they'd have to have water to wash off, especially when Solomon goes to sacrifice, and they sacrifice thousands of animals.
Yeah.
And you got to think that place would have just looked like Chainsaw Massacre all over, really bad. So.
A lot of blood. Yes, sir. And part of what we'll see in the next section, the carts and the lavers, the chronicler actually writes how these were for the washing when they're preparing the sacrifices. So these small carts were for that, and this larger, if it ties with what's stated in Exodus chapter 30, that which sat outside the tabernacle was for the washing of the hands and things of that nature for the priests, more of their cleanliness as they prepare to offer up these sacrifices. But let's go ahead and get verse 27 through 29, please.
He also made 10 carts of bronze. 4 cubits was the length of each cart, 4 cubits its width, and 3 cubits its height. And this was the design of the carts. They had panels, and the panels were between frames. On the panels that were between the frames were lions, oxen, and cherubim. And on the frames was a pedestal on top. Below the lions and oxen were wreaths of plated work.
Thanks, sir. I can bring it back to that image so we can actually see some of the things that we're talking about. This is the molten sea right here, and then the section that Preston has just started reading would actually be these carts that are over here on the side. Basically, there's 5 per side of the temple, 5 on each side, being 10 of them in total. Some of the details as we go through and look at these carts, you can only kind of imagine in your own mind exactly what these things look like. But even in these, there's not really, any expense spared. They're very high quality in the way that they're fashioned, in their design, in the art, if you will, that's on the sides of them. Each of these, the 10 carts of bronze, 4 cubits was its length of each cart, so they're 6 feet long, and they were 6 feet in width, so 4 and 4 cubits, and then 3 cubits high, so 4.5 feet tall, 6 by 6 wide in length. That's the size of this cart. Then, as we work through here, from the best of my understanding, you have that kind of base layout, and then you have panels on the sides creating a box, and then once we get to the lavers actually set down inside of that box, and they'll actually have wheels on the side of them, a lot like a wagon would have, axles underneath, and all of it's out of bronze. And then there's these supports that come up, it seems, from the corners of the square structure that actually catch the bowl itself to hold where it holds the water. So that's, it's kind of hard to know for certain, but you go with what you have in the text and you try and build that image in your own mind. Some of the detail, though, that's on these, here we have the cherubim mentioned again. Man, we have the cherubim mentioned again, but something else, the lines. This is the first time we've had any mention, if I'm not mistaken, about lines being, an image that is on parts of the works as it pertains to the temple. Cherubim, we saw a lot of that as it pertained to the inside of the temple, right? Cherubim was on everything, palms and things of that nature, but now you have these lines, you have oxen, and you have cherubim on the frames. Just more, craftsmanship and work that went into this. The wreaths, it's hard to really explain exactly what this looks like. Some of this is, your guess is probably just about as good as my guess on how these things actually look. But the main thing that we need to take away from, some of these things as far as all this detail, these things were made in a very specific manner so that they could serve and be used for the purpose that they were needed. Everything was functional, everything was made so that it could be used to work all the stuff, all the things that they would do there at the temple and the sacrifices and things of that nature. Functionality was a major key, in all of these things. If there's no questions, we'll go ahead and go verse 30 and 31.
Every cart had 4 bronze wheels and axles of bronze, and its 4 feet had supports. Under the lever were supports of cast bronze beside each wreath. Its opening inside the crown at the top was 1 cubit in diameter, and the opening was round, shaped like a pedestal, 1.5 cubits in outside diameter. And also on the opening were engravings, but the panels were square, not round.
Thank you, sir. So each one of these 10 carts are these box-like shape, 6 foot by 6 foot. They're 4.5 feet tall, and now they have these lavers that sit down inside of them, and they have axles and wheels that are made of bronze, and they're actually spoked, much like what you would see on a wagon. So each one of these are movable, for the use of work and where they need them. But again, just the fine detail that goes into each one of these. Similar shape, this pedestal type shape that comes up with an open top where they're about 18 inches across the top of the opening. For the washing, if you look back, at 2 Chronicles chapter 4, there's more detail given there, but more so for the washing as it pertains to the sacrifices that are being offered, as they're cutting this meat and things of that nature and being able to clean, after they do that. So that's more the function of these things. We're going to keep moving right along. Let's see if we can go ahead and get a few more verses in. If someone will, look at verse 32 or read verse 32 through 35.
Under the panels were 4 wheels, and the axes of the wheels were joined to the carts. The height of the wheel was 1.5 cubits. The workmanship of the wheels was like the workmanship of a chariot wheel. Their axle pins, their rims, their spokes, their hubs were all of cast bronze. And there were 4 supports at the 4 corners of each cart. Its supports were part of the cart itself. On the top of the cart, at the height of half a cubit, it was perfectly round. And on the top of the cart, its flanges and its panels were of the same casting. On the plates of its phalanges and on the panels he engraved cherubim, lions, palm trees, whatever there was a clear space on each, with wreaths all around. Thus he made the 10 carts, and all of them were of the same mold, 1 measure and 1 shape.
Go ahead and go to verse 39.
Then he made 10 levers of bronze, and each lever contained 40 baths, and each lever was 4 cubits. On each of the 10 carts was a laver. All right. And he put 5 carts on the right side of the house and 5 on the left side of the house, and he set the sea on the right side of the house towards the southeast. Laver.
Thank you, sir. About 240 gallons roughly is what each one of these would have held. There's 10 of them, and as stated there at the very latter part of that, there's 5 on each side of the structure much like what's seen in this image with the molten sea right out here. You know, every square inch of these, from the way it sounds, there was nothing, any open space that they had. There was design of some sort added to it. And these, you know, lines, the palm trees and everything that is just decorative. It was just as nice as it could be. Appreciate your attention. If we can get to chapter 8, in our next class, we will be able to get to a lot more application. This is a lot of details, so it's kind of tough to go through, but it's good information for us to know. So that covered chapter 7 through verse 39. Thank you all for your attention.